If you're watching this, you probably want an iron that's just going to work. You want something that's going to do its job without too much drama and isn't so precious that you can't even put water in it for fear that it's going to break. If that is your jam, I'm here to tell you that the Reliable Velocity 270 IR might be the perfect iron for you, and I'm going to tell you exactly why that is. Hi, I'm Shelly, and I'm a quilter, a long armor, a bag maker, and a certified iron snob. I have high expectations when it comes to my pressing tools, and I use the heck out of them. And I've been testing this one to death for the last couple of months, and I'm ready to share my thoughts on why this is the perfect iron for me, and maybe for you as well. I'm going to be doing a deep dive on this machine and its features, so if there's something specific that you want to know, you can check the table of contents in the description below and just jump right ahead to find the exact information that you're looking for. Let's kick things off by talking about the design and size. The Reliable Velocity 270 IR, or maybe I'll just call it the 270 going forward, is a regular handheld iron. That means that everything that you need to iron is in this one little package. You've got your handle, you've got your sole plate, don't worry, this is off, and you've got the main body that contains the water tank. Because of its smaller footprint compared to something that's like a tank-based model, this is a pretty easy iron to take with you places. So this would be a great choice if you were going to take your iron with you to something like a sew day or a retreat or a guild meeting. And I find that it's pretty easy to just pop it in a small little bag and carry it with me. It has an aluminum sole plate, which I have found to be a fairly durable substance. So I don't know anything about metals, and I can't tell you if this is more durable than something else, but I can tell you that I've been ironing with this model for about 2 months, and it doesn't have any scratches or dents or anything on it, but I don't think that that's a really good indication of how long it might last. But I've had this model, which is an older version from Reliable. This one is the 230 IR. This one is no longer sold. It's been replaced now, but I've had this one for over 2 years, and this thing has been through some stuff. So I have ironed a lot of stuff with this particular model, and the sole plate does not have a scratch on it. You can see that it's perfectly pristine. There's not a scratch, a dent, a mark, despite that fact that I have definitely dropped this more than once. But it's not like I'm ironing stuff that is like, I don't know, scratchy or made of metal. I'm just ironing fabrics. So to me, it makes sense that these should not have any damage to them whatsoever. And I'm happy to say that neither one of them does. So I do think that the sole plate is quite a durable material that is going to last you a very long time. The 270 has a long cord that's attached. So this is an 8-foot long cord, which I have found has been pretty useful in this small sewing space. The only thing about the long cord is that, I mean, this is how I tend to wrap it up when I'm not using the machine, but it doesn't seem like a very elegant solution. I guess I'm really being nitpicky. If they could make this sort of more beautiful, I would love that, but otherwise it's practical to have a nice long cord. The cord is attached to the base of the handle, and it has a swivel design where the cord moves freely. And I have found that I like this design. It doesn't feel like it gets in the way. And when I'm ironing, I often find that as I move my hand around, that the cord is just sort of magically swiveling to get out of the way. So I would say points overall to Reliable for making an iron that is kind of a nice size, easy to bring with you, and that has features that make it easy for you to use. Where the 270 IR really shines is water and steam. This is not some sort of a fancy pants, special, delicate iron where you're not meant to put water in it. You are definitely supposed to put water inside these irons. This one in particular has a large tank that can hold 1.25 cups, so like 1 1/4 cups, or about 300 milliliters of water. And it has a lot of steam holes on the sole plate, which means that there's lots of room for the steam to come out. It's very easy to fill up the iron because it has a large spout, which leaves you with a large hole for filling. So I can easily fill this up at my table using a large jug of water. Speaking of, let's talk about what type of water you should be putting in this iron. So it does have a built-in anti-scale system, which means that theoretically it should be okay for any tap water. But the manual does state that if you want to prolong the life of your iron, you should use distilled water only. And given the fact that I live in an area that has the hardest water on the planet, I only ever put distilled water in my irons because I want them to last. Reliable also told me that the very best thing that you can do if you want to really prolong the life of your iron is to remove the water from the tank once you're finished using it. So that means that, let's say you're ironing and you finish up at night and you know you're going to come right back and use the iron in the morning, you're fine to leave that water in your iron overnight. But if you know that you're going to be leaving it for any amount of time, the recommendation is for you to empty out that tank. And that's something that I didn't know before, so I thought I better share that with you in case that was a tip that you had never heard. Now let's talk about the steam that comes out of this thing. There is a lot of it, which makes me really happy because I am a steam enthusiast. So there's lots of different ways to actually control the steam that comes out, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. But I do want you to know that the steam comes out both when you're holding it in a horizontal position and also when you're holding it in a vertical position. So if you were to hold it like this and activate the steam will become shooting out of it. And in fact, I used this iron in a vertical position to iron out and steam this quilt that's hanging behind me because I took it out of storage and it was kind of wrinkly. So before I shot these videos, I just quickly went over it and I was holding the iron and steaming it. And I will tell you that it was a bit of a workout because this thing is a bit heavy. We're gonna get to that in a minute, but all that to say, when you're holding it in a vertical position and sort of waving it around, yeah, you can do it, but it's heavy and I wouldn't say awkward, but it was effort for me to do that. I'm not gonna pretend like I totally understand what I'm about to tell you, but I do know that these Reliable irons produce such amazing steam because of the fact that they have two heating elements inside of them. The first one heats up the water so that it's steam by the time it reaches the second element, which is the sole plate, which just heats up the sole plate, which I guess is different from the way most other irons work. I don't know, I'm not an iron scientist. What I do know is that these irons produce massive amounts of steam and I have never seen them spit or leak or dribble or have weird brown water come out of them. And that is definitely something that I have seen happen with some of the other brands of irons that I've purchased, mostly department store brands. So if that is something that you have had happen to you in the past, it's not going to be happening with your Reliable iron because of the magical stuff that they have going on inside. I don't know what that means, but I know it works. Speaking of, okay, so there's lots of ways to control the steam that comes out of this thing. Number one, the more you turn up the dial, the more steam is going to come out. So the hotter it gets, the more steam comes out. Those two things go in conjunction. And when you want to activate the steam, you simply have to hold your hand on the handle because the handle has got a sensor. It's got a sensor in the handle that when you touch this part right here on the back, that is what activates the steam. So what I really like about that is the fact that if I hold it like this, where my fingers are just touching the plastic part on the bottom and they're not touching the rubber part on the top, then there's no steam that comes out. But when I wrap my hand around the handle like this, then steam does come out. And that works really well for me when I'm ironing and pressing my blocks because I often want no steam and then steam, usually within 3 seconds of each other. So it's not like I want the steam to be completely turned off on the machine. I want to be able to have that control and to be able to change the steam by just sort of changing the way and where I'm holding the iron handle. So that is a big plus for me. When the steam comes out, it comes out in a continuous stream of steam. So there's no burst that happens. If that is something that you are used to on your old iron, you should just maybe know that that is not what this iron does. It just doesn't do that. It doesn't do like big bursts. It just comes out continuously. So that was something that I had to adjust to, but it doesn't make me upset, or it doesn't affect certainly the results that I get when I'm using this. When I'm ironing with it, I find that I get super flat seams. So I am not sad about the no burst. And If you wanted to turn off the steam for whatever reason, all you have to do is just push this one and only button on the handle here, and then that's going to deactivate the steam, which means that you can hold it any way you want and no steam is going to come out of the iron. So to sum up about the steam, I love it. I love it. I love it. It's so good. It's so powerful. It's so strong. And I find it does an amazing job of getting me nice flat seams. My new favorite thing to know about irons is how hot they get. And that can be determined by a number of different factors, but I think a lot of people put it together in their mind with how hot does it get, how powerful is it, with the wattage. So the reliable velocity 270 IR is 1800 watts, which means that when you plug it in, it gets up to its ideal temperature. Even when you crank it up to the maximum, it gets there very quickly. Now, theoretically, this thing works well at low temperatures, but I don't use that. I don't ever set it at a low temperature. It tells us that on its dial, it goes up to 8, and it says on the bottom that cotton should be set at 5, so number 5. But do you think that I set my iron to 5? No, I do not. I set it to 8. Every time that I turn this thing on, I just crank it up all the way to 8, because I figure the hotter the better. Makes sense, right? Okay, so how hot does it get? Well, the internet tells you that if you're ironing cotton, you want it to be at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. And this one does not reach that temperature in my tests. So I went out and bought myself a little infrared thermometer, and I tested this in a number of different ways. And the maximum temperature that I ever saw this reach was 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That is still very hot, but it's not 400. And in fact, most of the time, I would say that it is cycling because it's got a heating element that turns on and off, and it's cycling somewhere between 360 and 370. Most of the time when I pick this up and I test it, that is the temperature that it is, somewhere between those two numbers. So if it doesn't reach 400, can it still press a quilt block? Absolutely it can. I can tell you that it definitely presses my quilt blocks nice and flat. And I would not say that this produces flatter seams than, say, when I use the Maven over here, which absolutely does reach 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So internet, thanks for the advice, but I don't know if it's actually that important, because what I care about is how flat my blocks are. And I'll tell you that this seems like it gets plenty hot enough and those quilt blocks are nice and flat. But how does it feel? What does it feel like when you actually iron with this? Let's discuss. I mentioned before, but this thing is not lightweight. It is fairly substantial, and even with no water in it whatsoever, it weighs 1.8 kilograms or 4 pounds, 3 ounces, completely empty. But you're probably not going to use it empty. You're probably going to put water in it, right? You're going to want to put water in this. So when it is completely full, this iron weighs 4 pounds, 11 ounces or 2.1 kilograms. So that's not quite double what the Maven weighs, but it is hefty. So it's almost 5 pounds, it's like almost 5 pounds, this thing. So picture yourself holding onto a dumbbell and sliding it across your ironing surface. That is what ironing with this is like. But I love that. That's my favorite thing about it. I love how heavy this is. So one thing that I think really helps a lot is that the sole plate really does glide across your fabric. When it's cold, it does not glide as easily as when it's hot. When it's hot, it just glides like butter across your ironing surface and your fabric. So I think that helps a lot. But something else to keep in mind is that because it is this handheld model, you do a lot of this. So if you have some sort of heat resistant ironing rest, you could be ironing like this, pressing like this, and then just placing it off to the side. But I don't have that. So what I end up doing a lot is like a lot of pressing and then flipping, and then pressing and then flipping, pressing and then flipping. So it does actually kind of feel like a workout sometimes. But again, I love that because I find that it contributes to the flatness of my seams. So I like that when I put this down on top of a quilt block, it is acting like a dumbbell and it is sitting on there and it is pressing that fabric extra flat. And I like that I don't have to press, I don't have to push down on this in order to feel like it's making my seams nice and flat. So I like this. But this is not a good choice for you if you have just had some sort of an injury or if you have other problems with mobility. This is not going to be a good choice for you. Instead, you might want to look at a tank-based option that has just a lightweight head. This iron also feels nice in your hand. So whoever designed this thing obviously understands how humans work and how our bodies work, because it just feels really comfortable when you use it. So points to Reliable for making something that just feels natural when you hold it in your hand. And a big plus for me is that I like that when I place this on top of my block, I can wrap my hand around the handle, activate the steam, have continuous steam, and that steam is not going to reach my hand. My hand is going to stay nice and cool. So I'm a big fan of this iron for lots of different reasons, but one of the biggest ones is that it just feels nice. And I know for a fact that if you don't like the way your iron feels in your hand and it doesn't feel natural for you to use it, you're just not going to use it. And guess what? I reach for this thing every day. When it comes to performance, there's really only one thing that I want this iron to do, and that is make things nice and flat. And the Reliable 270IR absolutely will give you flat seams, and it will absolutely get the wrinkles out of your fabric. How does it do that? Well, it does that with the temperature and also the massive amounts of steam that come out of this thing. And I also think that it really helps that it's got this very, I'm gonna call it a sharp edge. That's the very edge of the sole plate. I find that this is really helpful when I'm pressing my quilt blocks, because I find that this edge is really easy to push up against a seam and then use it to flip the seam over. So I think that when it comes down to it, there's a number of factors that contribute to it. But the main thing that I have to say about these irons is that they give you really flat quilt blocks. And that is my favorite thing about them. They just work. So if somebody ever asks me, why should I get a Reliable iron? My answer is flattest seams ever. My one and only complaint about this iron is the controls. And specifically, I'm wishing that it would be a little bit different when it comes to the dial. So the iron itself is actually pretty simple. It only has one dial and one button. My complaint comes with this dial, this knob that you have to turn in order to change the temperature. Because when you first turn it on, it turns on to level 4. I'm not interested in level 4, thank you very much. I want to turn it all the way up because I want it to be as hot as possible and I want as much steam as possible because I'm trying to get those super flat seams. So immediately after I plug it in, the first thing I always do is turn it up. And speaking of this knob, it is not the best designed knob I've ever seen. It's kind of challenging to turn it. Like I find it's kind of finicky to get it to turn. And I often try and turn it and it doesn't go up to the level that I'm expecting it to. So it just feels a bit, this one little piece just feels like it's a bit of a letdown when it comes to the rest of this beautifully constructed, well-made, well thought out iron. It just feels like this knob is a bit of a letdown. But whatever, we can get past it because the flat seams. I really like that it beeps at me to let me know when it's been plugged in, when it has reached temperature, and then it also beeps when I push the button. So the good thing about the beeps is that they're really quiet. And I very much appreciate that as somebody who is often sewing in a room right next door to someone who is sleeping, a shift worker who is sleeping when I'm trying to sew. And then we've got our button, the other of two controls. This button does two different things. We already talked about the fact that you can push it once and it does have a nice satisfying feedback. And it just sounds good and you can tell when you have pushed that button. So when you push that button, it turns the steam on or it turns it off. And then it also has a second function that is wonderful. This machine has got an auto off feature. It's a great safety feature where if it is left and not used for a period of 8 minutes, it's going to turn into standby mode, which means that it's going to turn off the element. It means that you don't have something super hot just sitting around your room, potentially being a safety hazard. So it's a good safety feature, but one I feel like I don't need. And I love that I can override that safety feature. And I can do that by holding in this one and only button for 5 seconds. So with the auto off disabled, the iron just stays hot all day long, which means that I can plug this thing in at 8 o'clock in the morning and I can unplug it at like 8 o'clock at night or 9 or 10 or midnight or 3 a.m. or whenever I'm going to bed, and it will remain hot and ready to iron the entire day. And that's big for me, who doesn't need that safety feature. I also appreciate the fact that I don't need to dig out the owner's manual in order to know what setting to turn it onto, because it's got a cheat sheet on the back. So written right on the bottom of the iron tells you what all the different levels are, ranging from 1, which would be, it's called anti-shine, number 2 is eco, number 3 is silk, sure, and so on and so forth. They do recommend that you should turn it to 5 if you're ironing cotton, but I'm like, girl, I'm gonna turn that all the way up, thank you very much. So I turn it to 8, which is Turbo Max. Yes, please. Okay, so despite the fact that I have one little complaint about this kind of janky little dial that they have going on here, I do love how simple it is, and I love the fact that it just works, it just turns on, it's nice and quiet, and I can iron all day with this thing. So who is this iron really for? Well, I think it's a great choice for somebody that's got good mobility in their wrist, because as we mentioned, it's a little bit heavier than the head of a tank-based model. Because it's got the water tank all in the one unit, it means that it is a heavier unit, and you often will find yourself, I think, tipping it from in the downward position to up. So it's not as if you have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to lift this thing up, but if you've recently had wrist surgery, this might not be the best option for you. But it is a great choice for somebody that needs a smaller footprint. Because it is compact and everything is housed in this one little unit, it's a great option for somebody who likes to take their iron with them to places like retreat or sew days or guild meetings. So if you're after something that's a little bit more portable, this is a great choice. The 270 IR is also awesome for people who love steam like me. I'm a certified steam fiend. I gotta put water in my irons. I want it to last a long time. I want it to produce massive amounts of steam, and that is what this iron does. So if you have tuft seams that you're trying to wrangle into submission and you want them to be super duper flat, this is your iron. Because I have yet to meet someone who has tried one of these reliable irons and was not super impressed with the results. So as you can tell, I love this thing. I think it's a great choice. I use it every day in my sewing room, and I have never met a seam that it didn't make super flat. I love that it's really easy to use, it's small enough for me to take places with me, and it just works. It just works. That's what I like about it the most. If you liked this review, you might want to check out my video all about the reliable Maven 140 IS, which is a tank-based unit. And you might find it interesting the differences between the two irons. I'll put a link here so that you can check that out. And until then, I'll see you in the next video.